welcome everybody at the Mobycon Academy at the Q&A session about the movie Together We Cycle with filmmaker GERTJAN HULSTER, myself and my colleague Wayne, who is in Canada. My name is Angela van der Kloof and I'm hosting this Q&A. I work with Mobycon as a strategic advisor, and here with me in the studio is GERTJAN HULSTER. You are the filmmaker of Together We Cycle. Can you shortly introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you all for joining this, and thank you for inviting me. My name is GERTJAN HULSTER. I live in Haarlem. I'm 48 years old and I have a son of 4 years old. So we did 2 movies and tonight we're going to discuss the second movie.
Okay, thank you. And so my colleague Wayne, based in Ottawa, you can see him on the screen here. Can you shortly introduce yourself, Wayne?
Hi everybody, my name is Wayne Gong. Mobility consultant with Mobycon, and I'm located in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. I'm 31 years old, and in Ottawa there's some similarity with the Netherlands, except that we have a longer winter, snowy winter, but lots of people cycle.
Okay, thank you. And of course we're also curious where our audience is from, and we have a chat function in the YouTube channel. So if you like, you can share where you're from so that we have a sense of who you are and who's out there. In the chat function you can also send in questions for GERTJAN, maybe follow-up questions from the questions that we've already prepared. Well, I hope that everyone was able to see the film in the last weeks and that you have enjoyed it, that you learned new things. I have enjoyed it a lot and I've definitely learned new things. GERTJAN, you produced the film Why We Cycle. Now there is a second film, Together We Cycle. Why is there a second film? Why did you produce it?
Well, actually, during the process of making Why We Cycle, we thought, well, perhaps we should talk about the history of cycling as well. But then we thought it would be nice to focus just on what the unknown effects of cycling are to our society and to the people who live here, of having cycling on this scale. And then we thought perhaps it's nice to have a second movie and talk about the history. But when we showed the first movie, we found out that there were a lot of people asking, well, this is what we want, but how can we get this here? And perhaps we can teach some lessons, learn some lessons from the history of the Dutch cycling. So that's what gave us the last push to really produce this movie.
Yeah, nice. And so there are multiple themes throughout the film, and we took a few to discuss with you. And in quite a few parts of the film, taking back street space from cars is highlighted. Or taking back space from traffic. And the term traffic circulation plan is also mentioned repeatedly. And when watching the film, to me it felt that this is not just about cycling, this film, but it is more about traffic and space and cities. For example, in a clip that we took from the video, in The Hague, the first clip, the Prins Bernhardplein in 1978. So let's listen again.
Ja, dat zagen wij op ons afkomen als een soort wervelstorm of als een soort tornado op die stad afkomen. En ja, dat zou verder gaan, hè, met een hele grote dwarsweg. En dat Prins Bernhard-viaduct, dat was eigenlijk het schakelpunt. Als we het daar niet zouden stoppen, als dat niet gestopt zou worden, ja, dan betekent het gewoon dat een heel groot deel van de stad verloren wordt.
And so, at the end of the film, the voiceover even states that, cycling is rather a byproduct of developments in Dutch cities. Were you aware of this notion when you started to produce this second film?
Well, I think in a way we were, because I'm a cyclist in the Netherlands, but I was never aware of being a cyclist. And I think it's the same with the policy making here in the Netherlands about cycling. I think it never, and that is also something we discovered during making of this film, that there was not really a big scheme or a vision about, well, we want to be a cycling country, but it is a byproduct of all other things we wanted here, and that's what ended up in again and again improving the infrastructure for cycling and the space which is there for cyclists in the Netherlands. But I think it's never been from the outset the idea of, I mean, few people will have this idea, but I think in general most people had different perspectives or different objectives where cycling just fits in very nice. And I think that is something we learned during this film, that it works like this in the Netherlands.
Yeah, okay. And Wayne, you had some questions about that too, right?
Yeah, well, because nowadays there are so many elected officials know about this. Cycling is good for the cities. Cycling is contributing to a livable environment. But back then, in the 70s, how did the Dutch politicians know about this and have a strong opinion about the benefit of cycling?
That's an interesting question. I think, I mean, there was obviously literature about this subject which was quite influential. Jane Jacob is mentioned in the film. But I think one of the very special things, I think it's not very well highlighted in the movie because you have to choose sometimes, is that the counterculture movement here in the Netherlands, the hippie culture, took the bike as an image, as one of the most important images. So perhaps it was just a coincidence that the leaders of this movement here were interested in traffic and were interested in the bike as a solution for the traffic problems we had here in the Netherlands at the time. So I think this is something which is coincidental, because the counterculture movement was, I think, a worldwide phenomenon. But I think what was special here was that the counterculture really took the bike as one of their very strong images. I think, and then there was this idea of having the white bikes which would be available around for everyone. But I think this idea of having a very low-key means of transport which would be available to all was very strong in the 70s, and I think that helped a lot. So there was really what we would call a zeitgeist available, which helped the politicians as well to establish these ideas and to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. And so nowadays, in more and more cities around the world, there are car-free Sundays, like there were in the 1970s in different places. Do you think that will help in other cities to create the movement and to make changes?
Yeah, and I think I'm really curious what the effect will be of the corona crisis, because now people really, I mean, if I look to my own town where I live, or if I look to Amsterdam, and you see the city completely emptied and very quiet and very nice, and I think this will really help people to understand again what an enormous impact all this traffic has on our lives, on our daily lives, and if people appreciate this, and hopefully they will understand that it's something they can they manage to have when everything comes back to normal again. So I think this really helps, and I think car-free Sundays are a major step, but most of the times it's just a small part of the city. So now you see what the impact is if complete cities are empty, almost empty of car traffic. And you see many more people walking and cycling through the city. So
Yeah.
people, I hope people will see what is so nice about it, and will learn that it is something they can have if they'll make the right decisions.
Yeah, okay. And yeah, another theme that I think relates to that really well, and that also stood out for you, Wayne, is cycling as a social activity. So would you want to reflect a bit on that, Wayne, and what your question to GERTJAN is about that?
Of course, yeah, because well, the movie really strikes me, showing how cycling is not only a means of transport but also a social activity. Because like in the movie, I see people carry people on their bikes, people carry their pets on their bike, people cycle side by side, so that they can have a conversation. And like such activity is not seen as a norm, I guess, in countries outside of the Netherlands, whereas those in other countries, the government tried to focus on the mobility side of cycling, but not so much on the social side, so that they only talk about being safe, but not encouraging people to talk to each other, to social. And maybe you can explain why is it so unique in the Netherlands.
It's very interesting. Well, you lived in the Netherlands, so you're obviously aware of this notion of gezelligheid, which we have in the Netherlands, which is hard to translate or explain in any other country, but it's something like coziness, or so the feeling of being together and sharing the same activity is very central to our culture. I mean, I've got a small kid, as I explained before, and I found out that the first year, I think I said gezellig to him about 3,000 times a day, because that's something so, I mean, it's a unique word, but it's so very central to explaining what is happening or what you're doing together. So I think it's not so strange that gezelligheid and cycling is very connected to each other. So the social activity and cycling is very strongly related. But then again, I mean, in the 70s, the first steps in building cycle lanes and were also very much influenced by the notion that the safety problems that were there. I mean, there were 4,000 people killed each year in the Netherlands, and we're quite a small country. So it was very clear that we had to do something. So I think the first years, actually, the safety was really the major theme which made the first steps and the first investments in cycling. And later on, I mean, the idea of the social activity I think it developed later on as a very central theme in the Netherlands, in the Dutch cycling culture. But most politicians will go for safety and travel times and travel speed, which is, of course, it's much more easy to relate to money and to count, and so it's more difficult to measure. But I think it's a very important thing, and hopefully it will be something which is evaluated in other countries as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's still the traffic department that, you know, more or less sits on the chair of cycling policy. So the gezelligheid is maybe less relevant for them compared to waiting times, commuting times, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting that we never stepped aside of the idea that we could ride side by side. I think it is actually forbidden in the under Dutch law but it is never policed. Never the police doesn't fine you for it for doing it. So whereas in other countries, when you ride side by side, then or there will be a car, a motorist will tell you this is not something you should do. But here it is really well accepted, and this really helps making it very enjoyable thing to do.
Yeah. Okay.
And even, I mean, one of the examples is actually that so our prime minister is riding his bike and he's really showing off that he's very regular guy but I talked to people who said, well, I live in The Hague, and on my morning ride I met people who were working in Parliament, and it was always very nice because you could talk on the way to your office and discuss some things, and then go your way again, and it was very nice way for them to have some influence on the political level. So it's very easy to get in touch with everyone when you're riding your bike.
Yeah, it's easy to build bridges.
It's true, yeah.
Yeah, when you ride.
And I think the other aspect is, of course, that because we live everybody lives in a town where you know your neighbors because you'll see them walking and riding their bikes. So you know each other from riding your bike. So you know who is in your street, and when everybody only drives their cars, it's very difficult to find out who is who and where he lives. And I think that's also peculiar of our way of living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so to take that a step further, I think a related theme is children and the school environment. And let's have a look at the second clip that we selected with Alderman for Traffic Jacques Wallage in Groningen.
Maar een van de ellendigste dingen van een verkeerswethouder is wel dat hij mensen bij zich krijgt die zeggen: meneer, het is ontzettend druk bij de school, u moet er wat aan doen, het is gevaarlijk voor onze kinderen. Dus u zegt, nou dat kan wel, moeten we de straat een beetje smaller maken, of we moeten er een drempel in leggen, of we moeten het misschien zelfs verbieden voor auto's. Dan heb je binnen 24 uur heb je uit dezelfde buurt de mensen die zeggen van, ja maar was dat nou, het is toch een mooie brede weg, dan moet je toch hard kunnen rijden. Met andere woorden, mensen vragen van de overheid veiligheid, maar beseffen niet dat een belangrijk deel van die veiligheid gewoon afhangt van wat mensen in een wijk bereid zijn op te brengen. En ik heb het wel eens heel cru tegen mensen gezegd, jullie rijden eigenlijk met je eigen auto's, je eigen kinderen dood. En als je dat nou eens besefte, dan zouden we misschien in jullie wijk een fatsoenlijk parkeerplan en een verkeersplan kunnen maken.
So Jacques Wallage, he was an alderman between 1972 and 1981, so that's quite a while. And I think it's quite a firm statement that he makes in this, historical footage. And do you remember from what year this fragment in the film is? And was it from his early years or from later on?
Oh, I'm not sure about that. I don't recall what year it was precisely. But I know that he had, I know that he had some troubles with it because he had some police assistance at the time because there were a lot of threats coming his way. And in that time that was quite special because I think that was quite new for the Dutch political systems, that people needed police protection because so I think, but I mean, his career was very. I mean, later on he developed a very powerful career. So I don't think it really affected him in a negative way. But it shows that sometimes you have to really take a position and I really would love that we have some aldermen nowadays who would make this kind of statements, because I think it's still it holds very much truth still, even for now. So I think it was very nice to see this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's like even for Dutch people, it's quite blunt.
It is.
What he's saying. Yeah. And so then we have a third clip from the 1960s and 70s and the future of cities and towns, and how car parking had become a natural necessity for retailers. So can we have a look at the...
Wij zijn verschrikkelijk bang dat de klanten die op dit moment dus per auto de Wijmerstraat komen, dat zijn er honderden, dat die straks de Wijmerstraat zullen gaan mijden. En wij verwachten niet dat die omzet dan gecompenseerd gaat worden door de fietsende consument. Maar onze angst is dat de auto niet meer in de Wijmerstraat kan komen en daardoor onze omzetten dus sterk zullen gaan verlagen.
Het is gewoon onbegrijpelijk dat ze dergelijke routes nu in deze tijd gaan maken. Dat een wegen worden steeds smaller. Overal is een smalle weg. En wij hebben zo'n fantastische brede weg in de Mint. Nee, zeggen ze, we gaan hem lekker halveren. De helft fietsers en brommers, wat natuurlijk een gekkenhuis wordt. En de helft met een auto, dus waar je helemaal om moet rijden om weer in je eigen straatje terug te kunnen komen. Ga je per ongeluk verkeerd, heb je geen gaatje, moet je weer helemaal omrijden via allerlei omwegen en straten om dan weer een ander gaatje te vinden. Nou, het is gewoon kolder.
Yeah, so it's just crazy.
It's just
colder. So this mindset that drivers need to be able to park their cars everywhere in front of the shop, had it been contested before this period? And is there any evidence from people complaining before the 70s, or was this the first time that it was questioned?
Well, I think because the motorization took quite long here in the Netherlands before it took place. So I mean, in the 60s there were only, I think, 150,000 cars or something, and then in the 70s it really started growing. So I think in the 60s it was not really a problem. If you look at the pictures from those days, then you'll see that there wasn't that much car parking going on. So it was really okay, and then in the 70s, all of a sudden, these shopping streets were full of cars, and they couldn't go back or forth anymore. And then measurements had to be taken. But it was people at the same time were really thinking already that it was a privilege that they would never wanted to let go. So it was really hard to tell them that there would be a new reality. And also, well, the shopkeepers, it's the same story all over. I mean, even nowadays, shopkeepers always say that they need cars for their market, because the cyclists and walkists are secondary people with little money. Whereas if you look at the figures, it's not true anymore. I mean, it's actually the people, or a lot of people, because of the gentrification, you see that a lot of people cycling are actually pretty well-off people, so you really want them as customers. But that's how the shop owners think. They need these 3 car spaces in front of their store, because there will be plenty of people coming to them. So
yeah,
it's really strange, because there will be much more walking or people by foot or by bike coming to your shop when you invite them in.
Yeah, and so it's also about the future of our cities. You know, what does the future of our cities look like? And Wayne, you had some question about that too.
I guess it's not a question, but more like it would be interesting to find that lady in the clip who complained about she cannot park on the street anymore, and then taking away parking would kill the business. It would be nice to interview her again to see how her perception has changed nowadays.
Well, the funny thing is, we spoke to some people, the shopkeepers we spoke, because some of them are still there, and they said, well, you see that the street has all gone down and it's really horrible and it's a mess, but what you see is there's gentrification all over the place. So there's now, it's full of stores where you can buy very difficult kinds of coffee and stuff. So, well, what you see is that, of course, the shops has changed. I mean, it's not the same street anymore, but actually, it's not like that the street has run down. And even the shop owner who was really complaining to us about the way it looks now, he still had this shop there. but he had a large retail outlet in the outskirts of the town. And I don't know why he still had the shop there, but it was something he just stayed put there and kept complaining about all these cyclists coming through his street. But in a few years he will disappear also, and then the new shop owners have a new reality and they'll deal with it. And the shop street is still very much alive and kicking. So. It didn't affect them in the way they describe in the film.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's really difficult to change that opinion. I mean, really, when they think that this is what it is, it's really hard to change that line of thought.
Yeah, I can see that. And so, well, a more general question I have is that I was, watching the film and thinking, was it difficult to find this historical footage? Because I can imagine that maybe not everything was easily trackable by putting in a search engine, bicycle, and then these films coming up. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
No, it's true. It was really difficult to find this material because, as I explained, cycling is not really a subject in the Netherlands. I mean, it never has been. I think perhaps it now started to become a real subject on its own, but until now it was just a byproduct of other things. And in the 70s and 80s, when it was really difficult to film, there was not such a lot of footage available of this of traffic. I mean, and if there was footage of traffic, it was mainly cars. So actually, the biggest find we had was films which is the lobby club for cycling and cars in the Netherlands, made in the 70s and 80s, explaining how the traffic system worked.
Oh, okay.
And that was really nice footage because it was really right spot on. Because most of the there's, I think it's quite recent that you actually see, like in Dutch movies, that you see people cycling, because we're really very much focused here also on cars or the American lifestyle. So I think, so now you see sometimes even some advertisements with cyclists in it, which is really a step forward, I think, because it really starting to land in or with the people making this kind of films, that the cycling is there and it's not something which is going to vanish.
Yeah. And do you think that there is, do people reach out to you to say, hey, I have something interesting from my personal archive, or a city that knows that the regional archive has something?
No, yeah, well, there's obviously, but there's a very nice national archive in the Netherlands where all the material is situated, but that's quite a difficult party to work with because they're quite expensive. So and also they're more into films and television programs, and so there was some nice material we found there. But actually, so there was this one guy who had really nice material about the demonstrations in the city in the eastern part of the country. But he didn't allow us to work with it because he thought we were too commercial or something. So
Okay.
So that was very nice that he had this idea about that the biking should really be something which should not be too capitalistic, non-commercial product.
Yeah. And Wayne, you had a question too about the clips, the government awareness clips.
Exactly, yeah, because I saw in a movie, and it's quite interesting to see clips or like a public campaign put out by the government where kids were playing on the street and then cars were not looking carefully and then hit the kids. And nowadays, this kind of public campaign can be quite provocative, right? It's annoying, it's quite shocking, and we would not see campaigns like this nowadays on the TV. Just wondering how that happened and why the government would make clips like that back then.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, you mean the black and white footage with people being hit by a car with a very dramatic effect.
Yeah.
I think that was from the early 60s, and then you see that actually the approach was really like the car, you should watch out for the car. I mean, it was like I think it was just after the Second World War that there were people, the police was driving around in a vehicle and shouting at people that they should walk on the sidewalks, and that cyclists should cycle on the right side of the road. So so I think what you really see is that in the 60s, really the idea was that people should get out of the way of the car. And if you look at the very nice clip of the Woonerf, which I think is quite spectacular, because then you see that they actually explain that the car has got a secondary role in residential areas. So there you see that how the ideas about this are changing, and this is really like there's a new discourse going on about how you think about the position of playing kids and people living in these areas. So that's quite spectacular to see this shift in ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really nice, that scene in the Woonerf.
Yeah.
And also around that Woonerf, but in a number of scenes, it becomes clear that citizens and different kinds of organizations outside of government were somehow involved in a lot of the developments, either in pushing things, but also they were asked, for example, in Delft. And I am intrigued by one of the examples, which is the number 6 clip we want to show.
In the 50s and the 60s, children could easily play in streets. No problem. It's good fun. And there were no separate playing yards with fences. It was just a street. Go out the door, knock on the window of the neighbor, say, come on, come out, let's play. But then the motorization came and the car took the place. And people started complaining, of course. So the municipality, who is responsible for safety in public space, had to do something. So we decided to do an experiment by reconstructing a simple single street. And of course we had to explain this to the people who are living there. During the meetings, we noticed that the women were the experts of the street, because they knew what was going on, they knew what was needed, what should be changed, what should be kept. The men were not the experts. They were away the full day. And they explained us that it's not just a traffic problem. They want to have, let's say, more safe place to sit, to chat to each other, for children to play, rearranging of the parking, things like that. In fact, what we did is changing a road with traffic into a street with more functions.
Yeah, so can you elaborate a bit on what family life looked like and why were women the experts and not the men?
Oh, this really has something to do with the fact that the labor participation for women took on very late in the Netherlands. So in the 70s, it was actually still the man who made the money, and I think women still had were really like raising the kids and keeping the household. So I think that was something. I mean, this just changes in the 80s in the Netherlands. So that was quite late. So, but it's really interesting to see what they did. I mean, it's the same in Groningen. The example in Groningen with the traffic circulation plan, but also here, that it was really about what we would now call social engineering. So there was a lot of talking going on with the people in the neighborhoods and trying to find out what they wanted. And it's very interesting that they find a way to not talk just to the motorists, but also to the residents, so the people who lived in these neighborhoods and who had to deal with these large volumes of traffic which were going on. at the time. So, and I think that is very remarkable on this idea. And so what you see is that it's actually not the ideas of the new way of traffic design in the Netherlands were not from the book, but were actually really because they started listening to what the public thought about these subjects.
Yeah, and I think also the fact that the car ownership of women and the number of driver's licenses amongst women was really low back then compared to now.
Yeah.
Probably if you would do the same thing now, it may turn out quite differently.
Yeah, I suppose it would. Yeah, I think that now the acceptance of car traffic is much higher in the Netherlands. I mean, there's still a lot of complaints about speeding in cities, and so there's still, but the awareness is not as high as it were in those days. But then the volume of traffic deaths was also much higher than it is now. But still, I think it really strikes me that people are so accepting about this phenomenon. So there's little critique now.
Yeah. And Wayne, you also wanted to ask something about what happened in the 70s, that it's not only about moving people, but other organizations were involved too.
Yeah, well, I guess my question is, like, when we see those Woonerf ideas got accepted, and before people in the Netherlands were protesting against building highways and destroying neighborhoods, and so the cycling became an icon for this community values, for this historical values, and I guess how did people like, I guess nowadays what people can do to differently so that they can make their voice heard by the local officials, so that there will be more communities preserved and not building highways and destroying neighborhoods, etc. What was that process like back then?
Well, it's very interesting if you look at the example of Amsterdam, which is, I think, a quite iconic example, because they're really pushing a highway just through the middle of the city, so through the old city center. And people rose up against it, and there were also protests because there was a shortage of affordable housing at the time. The city council wanted to they wanted to actually build something like an American city center with a lot of high-rise buildings. And so people rose up against this. But actually, when the votes came in the city council, the idea was voted away with just one vote difference. So what you see is there were a lot of protests, and there were a lot of groups involved. So there were the left-wing anarchistic types, but also the conservative people who wanted to conserve the old city. So this combination of groups working together helped to getting enough people on their feet to do something about this. But still, it was just one vote difference. So actually the city was really divided at the time, I suppose. So the opinions were really strongly divided in the sense that half of the people were in favor of the idea of building this modern city with speeding traffic, and the other half said, no, we don't want this. So, and I think it's nowadays because the policymakers are now more aware that the idea of preserving the old towns is also of commercial value and very important for all kinds of reasons. So perhaps it's now much easier to, I mean, now every city produces some reports saying that they want to make more way for walking and cycling in the Netherlands. So it's not that very, so the debate it's much more easy. But still, we need people like the Fietsersbond every now, so the Cyclist Union, because what they do is they look at every new plan for a road when a road is refurbished, and they always go to the city council and say, hey, listen, you forgot the cycle lane, or you should add whatever is needed there. So you still need this participation, but I think it's now more, it's not that much on the streets now anymore, but it's still going on, yeah. So what one of the people say in the movie, it's, I mean, every street is a contested terrain, and it's still discussions are always there. I mean, every street there's large debates when the city council decides to change a road layout, then there's immediately large debates, and people are, I mean, people come to the city council all over again, yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so you say, you know, every piece is contested, and this relates to what our colleague Melissa Brundtlet says in the film. You know, you have to keep thinking forward. The job is never done. So that made me think: is your job done now? Are you done with filmmaking about Dutch cycling? Have we said everything about it?
No, well, actually we're working now on a third film, so at the moment we're still pretty much involved in cycling, and then we'll see what happens, because it's a very, I mean, it's a very dynamic subject, which, as you say, I mean, it relates to such a lot of things. I mean, it is about the quality of cities and the quality of life, and it's much more than just this simple machine which takes you everywhere. So now we are working on a third project, and this will be about the future, because we think now in the Netherlands, as I said, it is the first time that we really start taking cycling very seriously. So it really has its own policies now in city councils. So and a lot of other things are going on, because of the e-bikes, and so there's a lot of things going on now. So it would be really nice to see what the new ideas are, and I think there's similar as in the 70s and 80s. There's really a shift in thinking again. So there's a new way of planning cities and new ideas of how you want to make high-quality spaces and livable cities.
Okay, well. I already look forward to seeing that third film. I hope our audience is looking forward to that too. And yeah, with that foresight, I would like to thank you very much, GERTJAN, for your answers to our questions. I'm sure we could have asked many more questions, but hopefully at some point there will be Q&As live in places around the world. We'll see what happens. I would like to thank Wayne for your comments and questions. Always good to have perspectives from other parts of the world too. And I would like to thank our colleagues here in the studio for helping organize and making this happen. And of course the audience for keeping us busy. The last thing I'm going to say is that next week, same time, there will be another webinar with our colleagues Shelley and Stephen, who take you on a virtual study tour through Delft. So have a nice day.